Julio, thanks for coming on the Judge McCall podcast. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, man.
Hey, same here, same here. We spoke a couple months ago, and we were just chatting about that. Um, there were a couple of things we really wanted to talk about, and you are a very successful entrepreneur. You're quite young. You do all this from Mozambique, and now you're in South Africa. Maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did this, what really motivated you to become an entrepreneur so early in your life?
Sure. So it all started for me when I was just about to graduate from university, and I realized I didn't have a job afterwards, like many people. And one of my friends, he was already an entrepreneur doing some transportation business, and he wanted to go into developing short-term courses. So he had all the entrepreneurial experience, but he knew nothing about academia per se or knowledge-based businesses. But there was my jam. So I was a lecturer assistant in university to help pay for my scholarship and my fees in the university I was studying in. And my parents were teachers, so education and knowledge-based stuff was is really my jam. And so we joined forces and we started this company out of scratch, two young people. And I remember we really went over what we thought it was right because I had no experience developing courses. My experience at the time was just delivering courses. And I remember I had to Google, how to build a session plan for a workshop and stuff like that. But then in 3 months, we trained almost 600 people in total. And for you to think this is like a startup that no one heard of, and sort of like the key of our success early in the stage is that we were quite doing a lot of interactions with the market. So, we did all the research piece. We asked students what they wanted to learn. We kept their contact details. So when we launched the courses, we send them SMS and all that stuff. And the energy was just cool and vibe. I mean, I was giving teachings and classes like 8 hours a day, and I didn't want them to be boring. So I really make sure that it was interactive and fun and people really appreciate it. From that place, in the days in Mozambique, business mentors, advisors, there was not even words we were used to. So it was at a time in the business where I felt I was making good decisions, but I wasn't making great decisions. And I just didn't know how I could make that leap. So it made sense to me to get a job while my co-founder was still running the business. And that's what I did. I joined a Mozambican company called Idea Lab. They are major in supporting entrepreneurs in a more of ecosystem level. So they work with different stakeholders to support entrepreneurs, and they work with entrepreneurs directly with trainings, with events, business advisory. And I joined them to work on marketing. And then because of my background, I became a business advisor and mentor to the startups and a trainer. And 2 years into that business, they invited me to launch the very first business incubation program in Mozambique. So that for me was huge because I was literally the generation that heard that, well, you should start businesses, you should do stuff, but we just don't know how young people, we just don't know how to do those things. And I was given the chance to be in a place where I could help other young people to follow their dreams. So that was super cool. And in 2 years, their business grow. And for me, what was growing was this sense that I should be able to do more. Like I wanted to do more. I wanted to explore the world. I just didn't know how back again. And it really went home when I was in Bahrain in the Middle East. We were doing a speaking engagement there, the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is one of the biggest entrepreneurship events in the world. And after the speaking, this bunch of Arab guys, they come to me and like, Julio, can you just have like a small talk with you after the big session? We really want to get deep into some stuff. I went there, we talked with them, and I remember the guy told me like, Julio, now I know what I need to do with my life and my business. Like I'm crystal clear. Deep down, I was just feeling empty. Like I was literally just showing up. I was so depleted because I knew I wanted to do more and I wasn't doing it, that it was really starting to, way down in my productivity and stuff. So that led me to launch my current business, Fair Knowledge International, where we focus on helping entrepreneurs and executives directly by offering power coaching, training, and speaking engagements. And for the corporates, we offer them knowledge consultancy. So we help them harness the power of knowledge of their people so they can start growing their business from a place that really feels good to them. There was a very long story, the shortest I could tell you.
Yeah, I mean, this seems that there's a lot that's been going on, and you have your own venture. You already worked with an incubator, and now you're doing your
Yeah.
second venture. So this is awesome. What I think a lot, including me, and a lot of people are interested in that is Africa is kind of as a bigger destination, and then
Yeah.
Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, is always hailed as this enormous potential. And
Mm,
we, in terms of investment opportunities, and in terms of what knowledge-based business models could do for the large population. And I had Daniel Gross on, who runs a completely virtual incubator, Pioneer. And he's had a lot of investments that he did in Southern Africa, but also including Nigeria. So there's a lot of potential. We sometimes it's hard to grasp this, right? It's a big population. Its connectivity is increasing quite nicely. The last time I was in Mozambique, what was interesting for me was I was in Maputo, and
uh-huh.
most of the internet connections I could get at hotels or coffee shops was really slow. But then I just
Yeah.
tapped into LTE, and it was like 100 Mbit everywhere, all in the countryside. I'm like, holy smokes! So I didn't see that coming. I was super fast and was super cheap. It was like $1 for a gigabyte. Anyway, so
Yeah.
there seems to be a slightly different way that each country obviously goes, and maybe it's a different kind of connectivity. What I'm trying to get to, when you look at the opportunities that you see for entrepreneurs, how does this stack up? And I know you've been awarded one of the most prominent entrepreneurs in Africa, I think a couple of years ago. Give us an insight where you feel these opportunities are real and they maybe just made up.
For sure. I guess we need to start taking a step back and just put like Africa in a bit more of context for our listeners. So the first thing is that when you look at the world map, you see this huge chunk of land altogether that is Africa. And unlike other continents like Europe or Americas or North America or South America, even though it's a continent it all together, we couldn't be more different. Even though we have so many similarities. So that's the first point. And each country has slightly different nuances in terms of cultures and what people value and what type of business can flourish. But something that I found that's quite different from African markets than we have from any other markets, it's how mobile our money is. I mean, if you look at countries like Zimbabwe, they really don't have fiat money anymore, and they just use mobile money. And mobile money, it's not like you transferring stuff on PayPal, it's the money that is associated with your mobile phone. So you can transact using your mobile phone. That's a huge difference from the rest of the world when it comes down to Africa. And
It's kind of the
hence, you have,
original Bitcoin, right? It came from Kenya, right? So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
those
from
were
Kenya.
the
Yeah.
first. I forgot the name to be. What is it called in Kenya? Ambo. Forgot the name.
I
It's
forgot, but in
gotten really
Mozambique and
famous.
Tanzania, it's M-Pesa right now,
M-Pesa.
and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
owned by Vodacom or
yeah,
Vodafone in other
yeah. I
countries.
think that's the one. Yeah, the original Bitcoin, or the African PayPal, so to speak. Yeah.
It is. It literally is. And I guess a lot of foreigners they sort of like get stuck with that. Like, how is it possible? That's one of the main differences. And the other difference is in terms of logistics. Even though it's a whole continent, and you will think that well, it will be so cheap and easy to travel, and travel not only people but also merchandise or stuff travel around the continent. That's not the case. So there is a lot of opportunities and challenges within logistics per se. But to really go to your point, Africa is literally the land of opportunities. What you really need to do to tap into those opportunities is start looking at them from the lenses of the local people, right? So Africa has this whole story of being colonized by different European countries, and then people finding their independence back again, and then with the globalization, we're trying to sort of like align with the rest of the world. It's very important that as someone that comes from outside Africa, or even just a different country within the continent of Africa, that you allow yourself to have the empathy with the locals and understand what they're coming from and what really matters to them. And they will, I will say, it's the main reason why a lot of foreign investments they fail when they come to Africa is that they try to replicate, either based on the weather, because the weather in some parts of Mozambique can be compared with California, and they think that the same way people operate in California in the US is going to be the same way they operate in Mozambique. So no, there are opportunities, but really look at them from the perspective of the locals.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I, it's interesting that you mentioned the weather. Um, but, that's. I think that's when you think about. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about impact investing.
Uh-huh.
When you talk about pure agriculture investments, I think those are something. And when you think of enabling local farmers, have organic products, those are investment ideas that are very popular. I don't feel they are they're not easy to pull off. Let's put it this way, because of the issues you just described. It's possible, right? And there is stories. I know there's stories in Malawi, for instance, but it's hard to scale them. So those you end up with relatively small farms, and it's a patchwork. And logistics is a huge issue of getting anything out. For instance, I was dreaming to become a nuts farmer in Malawi. So
Ooh,
when I talked to a couple of people in Malawi, and they have those, what is nuts called? The really high end nuts. Oh my gosh, I forgot about those. Anyway, so
the
there's a
cashew
real,
nut.
no, there's another one. It's grown in Hawaii. Um, oh gosh,
Macadamia?
macadamia. Yeah, sorry, couldn't come up with the name.
No
Um,
worries.
so there's a big internal market for macadamia nuts. So there's a bunch of farms who already do this. It's very fertile ground. But getting those macadamia nuts, and it's apparently extremely cheap to grow them. I mean, compared to
Hmm.
anywhere else in the world. But getting those nuts out was incredibly difficult because there's even just small quantities like with FedEx or UPS, which are present. It was a logistical nightmare. So sooner or later, I gave up. I mean, you can get them for 1/4 of the price that they retail for if you have even small quantities, and they're high quality. So if something is missing in between, right? This missing link is something you just look at certain variables, and then, well, I gave up becoming a nuts farmer in Malawi. Maybe this was a good idea, or maybe
Oh,
not. I still love the idea.
but there's also something worth mentioning. So, for those who doesn't know, Malawi it's a country that sits almost in the center of Africa. So there is no like straight link from any port or shore to Malawi unless it's the Lake Malawi, and it's a huge lake. But then it's like it's a lake. It's not the sea. You don't have connections to other places in the world.
Yeah,
They're making hard for for logistic companies to really work on. That's one. And also there is the whole political tension, and I guess the Lake Malawi is a great example. So it's one lake that in Malawi it's called Lake Malawi. In Mozambique, where I'm from, it's Lake Niassa, which is the province that the lake sits on, and in Tanzania it's Lake Tanganyika. So there is a lot of this ownership over different African assets, I'll say, and sometimes it can be hard for all the countries to agree. One of my clients is working to build a railway that was supposed to connect Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania, but even that we don't have a railway linking the entirety of Mozambique, for instance, in the same country. So yeah, there are challenges in that, but also there are opportunities on how we can be creative in doing those, building those bridges and building those links.
yeah. Well, one thing I feel that strikes me as coming with great potential and relatively limited challenges is digital content, right? So the internet connectivity has gone up quite a bit. The last time I was in Accra in Ghana, I probably had the fastest internet ever, like 400 mbit in any random location. I'm like, holy smokes, what is this, right? And because they probably have this new under sea cable that just goes through the location where Accra is, and it's close to
Yeah.
the sea. So that was great to see, and and it's an English speaking population with very high levels of English proficiency. And I was thinking, whoa, you can have, starting from call centers, but also producing content. We all think about the YouTube world, right? We think about
Yeah.
premium content that you can actually sell. I thought this is easy because, well, all you need really is fast internet access, and from then on, you basically just you keep going from there and find the premium model. Obviously, you can do this for the local market, but with the connectivity, you can also do this for the non-local market, and that seems to be where India and Bangladesh is really taking off. They have been doing this for 20 years, and they seem to be successful. I don't know how big these businesses have gotten, but they seem enormous to me from what is visible to me on the internet. It's not something I see so much that has taken off yet, that might change or is already changing in coastal communities in Africa.
Yeah, 100%. And I see a rising of knowledge-based or really just online essence-based businesses. I want to call it that way. And I actually have examples. So here in South Africa, there is this comedian called Lasizwe. So he has 1.5 million followers on Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, his whole comedy is around the different tribes in South Africa, and the main ones being the whites, the coloreds, and the black. And he always have like, how will a black mom react? How will a white mom react, and stuff like that. And it's very relatable in South Africa and some of other African countries. But he have grown so much in such a short period of time because of the digital, as you're mentioning. But then I also got a chance to meet Elsa Majimbo from Kenya. So she now has 2 million followers, and she collaborated with people like Naomi Campbell, big brands, Valentino, and stuff. And her like comedy is more around, people not showing up on time and more of like international stuff. So that even though her and Lascivia did start quite on the same time, because one is like targeting the world, more general stuff, she was able to grow a bigger audience. So there is this growth happening in there, and associated with that, there is a growth of personal brands and knowledge-based companies happening as well. And I guess the most challenge, or where entrepreneurs usually struggle here in Africa, is deciding if they want to stay local or if they want to go national or global, because unlike many other countries in the world, at least in Europe or in Americas, we don't have just one language in African countries, right? We have many languages, and usually one or two are the official languages. So
Well,
that's
Europe
usually
has
where
a ton
entrepreneurs
of
struggle.
languages too. Right, right. But what about? I
Yeah.
think for me the general issue oftentimes seems to be, and that's always the issue, obviously, in a content based economy, is how do you monetize it, right? How do
Hmm.
you develop it from a free product into a freemium product or a decent premium product? And that's always really hard. That takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of resources to get there, right? Because you need to challenge. You need to know what customers want at what point of time, so they're eager and interested to buy into it.
Yeah.
And Netflix is probably the best example. They early on were bidding with lots of money for those content rights to stream in different countries, and they had it per country, and then they changed it, and then they didn't want to go international, and then they only wanted to go international. It changed every couple of years, right? And
Yeah.
this is a good example where obviously it's foreign content, and it's very expensive content, but still it's a good example where they also changed the way what they charge. So it's about $10, $14 a month in the US, but I know for instance, in Mexico, it's only like $5. I don't actually know what it is in Kenya, but they figured out a way to price it for each individual country. And
Yeah.
that's obviously you could start local. If obviously nobody can bid for Hollywood rights, none of us are rich enough for this. Maybe Elon Musk can help us, but there is always content that's premium. People are ready to pay for if you find that audience, right? So if you find an audience that has enough of a pain point, so to speak, that doesn't have too high enough opportunity cost, so they actually pay for your content.
Yeah, and I will say that in the end, really, comes down to the revenue model you want to have in your business. So, you can go on models where you charge the beneficiary, the end user, but you can also have sponsors or corporate clients that pay you so that you can give your product and service for people that actually need but cannot afford it. So you can be quite creative, and I think this point ties back with your investment point, because something that I found, especially with foreigners trying to come to invest in Africa, is the sense of is the knowledge and the trust on the knowledge people are presenting to them, and being able to really rely on the partner, because usually you cannot fly in and out every time, or there are language barriers, and it is just the local context that as a foreigner you don't know, but the locals might know, and they might be able to build the bridges to help you out. So I guess, yeah, it comes down to the revenue model and how you just monetize your trust in general,
Yeah,
that social capital you are bringing and you want to bring in your company.
yeah. Not everyone can be like Mark Zuckerberg and launch just a couple of balloons, right, to bring the internet to to Africa. And when you look at it now, it looked good on paper, right? It was a good PR stunt. But when we now look at Facebook, it's this weird spying machine that he wanted to get to everyone, right? Because it's Facebook traffic that he wants. He doesn't care about the other services that you use on your internet.
Yeah, and being honest, man, you're open a conversation. I was actually talking about how Instagram is disrupting markets, because usually people look at governments disrupting markets, developing governments, from Europe coming to Africa to disrupt the market again, and we forget how corporations do it. And I was talking about, if you have picture two entrepreneurs like doing the same business, let's say they are in photography, and they all have 2,000 followers in December 2020. The entrepreneur in the US, let's say he's in Florida, he get access to Reels. He's able to crazy expand his reach, not just in a local level, but in an international level. That will probably mean that he will have more followers and probably more money after 6 months, while the entrepreneur in Mozambique didn't have access to Reel in the first place.
Yeah,
And I understand the difference, or the tailoring made by location, but we're talking about a digital product. And what's worse is then when the entrepreneur in Mozambique has access to Reels, he won't have that magnified exposure anymore. right? So literally, you see a corporation completely disrupting international markets, even though it's a digital company. So therefore, location shouldn't be a problem unless the person doesn't have access to internet. But still, you see it happening.
Yeah, it's that's a really good topic. When we see these big platforms, it's obviously it's kind of, they're all made like a pyramid scheme, right? So you want to be
Mm,
in early, and then you have the biggest benefit, and then as longer as later you come, it's more like you're that consumer. So you're not getting the two-way traffic that you want. It's basically you're liking someone else's post. Nobody will like your post, right? So it's for the narcissists. You want to be really early in that game, and that eventually pays off. You know, this narcissism entrepreneurship. Maybe that's a little too harsh, but building a personal brand, you want to be early in those markets, and that often this can be a challenge. I think it's also a cultural challenge, right? So I grew up in Germany, and they rather be late adopters. So they don't want to be early adopters in anything. They're good at being late adopters and then really excelling at building perfect
yeah,
products. But if you're with this mindset, then it's not good to be early, because the product doesn't have this maturity yet. So as an entrepreneur, it's really difficult to sell early adopter products. It's basically impossible. So say we have the same product as the same example you just made, and say it's a software product and targets early adopter companies or consumers. It's really tricky to get an initial critical mass in Europe. It's almost impossible. And I think the same probably applies to a lot of African markets. But the same product and the same sales pitch will get you, I don't know, 1 million customers in the US, because there's so many early adopters here, right? And they will
that's
test it,
true.
they will like it, or they think it's crap, and then you will never go anywhere. But at least you have that potential, and then you roll it out globally. But you don't have that option. I think a lot of Israeli companies have found that niche. They develop their tech based in Israel because they know how to develop tech, but they know there's a very small country, and they're not exactly super early adopters from a marketing perspective. They are in terms of hardcore technology. So what they've done, they've basically just said, we're never going to market it here. We just have the back end here, and we just do all the marketing in the US. And if it works in the US, and then we roll it out in Israel. So even if
Yeah.
a lot of products developed in Israel are not even available, well, unless you have a VPN, there's always a way around it, but they're not directly marketed to Israeli customers.
And I totally relate with that. I mean, my first 100 coaching customers, they are all from US, Canada, and the UK. I mean, for many reasons, the early adoption is one of them, but also the buying power, right? Like people in the US and Europe, they use in dollars and euros, and the months that I feel my work is being honored, I mean, it will probably take 6 months for the regular Mozambican to be able to afford a 1 hour session with me, right? So even as an entrepreneur, I had to work around my mindset and understanding that, if I'm able to charge what I really deserve from my high paying clients, I can then build initiatives that really support the entrepreneurs that need support, but they cannot afford it. So that's one that's super important that you mentioned that. And when it comes down to Africa, I feel most people just assume that people are not early innovations because they don't want to be early innovation, which is not true. Usually what happens is that there is so much risk associated with that early innovation that I actually prefer to see it validated, and bulletproofed before I can afford to take the risk. It is actually something that I do my best to teach entrepreneurs is even when it comes down to investing. If you're coming from a background where you feel you cannot take that much risk, don't gamble about on how much you can make. Really choose your affordable loss, right? So I usually say to entrepreneurs, like, you have an idea, you want to validate it, how much are you willing to lose? Let's say you try it out and you figure out that the business doesn't work for you or doesn't work at all. How much are you willing to invest and lose? Chances are you're not going to lose that money. You're going to learn something from it and sometimes even make the money back. But it's just having that mindset that it's not about how much you're going to win, but how much you're willing to lose. Just give you that peace of mind to start making the steps to break the poverty cycle. Does it make sense to you?
Yes, I mean, yes. Obviously, I think that's why it's a good topic you're leading us into. Is what I think entrepreneurship has gotten a lot of this. The word entrepreneurship, people immediately think of the Silicon Valley type entrepreneur, right? It needs to be
Yeah,
billions of venture capital. And this
yeah,
venture capital obviously is a very trend following. So they invest into a trend, and they want to get out of this investment as soon as possible, definitely within the next 2 or 3 years, if they can, right? So it's kind of this SoftBank idea that you have to have this massive $1 billion minimum invest. That's kind of their minimum now, right? and they can
Yeah.
invest up to 10 billion in a startup. Like, think about WeWork. Nobody knows why they invest that much money, but they must have a plan, right? So someone has a plan at SoftBank. I hope. I don't know. It's their money. They can do
we
whatever
hope.
they
We
want.
hope, people.
Well, they can do whatever they want with their money. But I'm trying to say this. What I agree much more with Nassim Taleb's description of entrepreneurship, which is really the individual risk taker. So what we want is an as high as possible, ideally 20, 30, 40, 50% of the population. So an enormous, way bigger than what we see right now in the description of entrepreneurship. And we don't want necessarily the company that has hundreds of $1 millions of venture capital or any kind of capital infused into it. For me, that's not a startup. What I want is the entrepreneur who goes out, just as you said that earlier, who goes out, validates an idea, conviction of his or hers, and then runs this against the market and sees what comes out of it. And yes, most of them will still fail. This will not change. But this risk that someone took will solve a small part of that equation, but it adds up to a bigger equation for the whole population, and the whole population benefits because they then realize, oh, well, this is how good this specific thing can be solved, right? So when we think about how good digital solutions have gotten, how good the iPhone has gotten, this is possible. Well, the iPhone's maybe not a good example, but let's because it's too centralized. But if we all go out and do contribute to the betterment of the world, right, of society, then it really ends up. So this wave of entrepreneurship multiplies throughout the society. The problem obviously is, how do you convince yourself to take this 6 month off, this 12 month, right? To say,
Yeah.
well, I'm already living in squalor, so to speak. So I really can't afford to do this. But I think this is really, it doesn't really matter how, it's a routine mindset, right? It doesn't really matter how poor you are, how you can afford it. It's okay, there is something on the other side that A, helps me, but also B, has a huge upside. And this is why I should start now. And I think this is so difficult to get this motivation pinpointed for entrepreneurs. And I often feel the public initiatives, like government initiatives, they don't really do much about that. Like, they want to, but they don't really. It's important to have the opportunities. It's you want to look more to the upside than, okay, you're covered for the next 6 months. That's my personal point of view. That's
Yeah.
obviously very difficult to instill in people.
100%. And being honest with you, all my work is based on the concept that success is 80% internal game and 20% external game. So the 80%, you have your identity, your mindset, and your energy, and only then you work on the strategies you're going to change the context, which is the 20%. And I like to give this laptop example to people. It's like, when you want to buy a computer, you get to choose between a Windows based or a Mac based computer, right? That's the identity of a computer, the hardware and the software. But then if you buy the brand new MacBook on Earth, you still need to install some programs to make it run and work for you and do whatever you want, like Adobe Photoshop, Zoom, whatever it is. And that's your mindset. It's all the beliefs that you have and all the programs that are running in your mind that allows you to show up in the way that you want to show up. And then going back to the laptop example, if we have the most expensive laptop in the world with all the premium programs installed, eventually you need to connect it to a power source. Otherwise, it will die out. And that's how you see a lot of entrepreneurs trying and going back and giving up and try it again and giving up. But the thing is, if you work on upgrading your identity and updating your mindset, so you can start shifting your energy to create the strategies and implement them, becomes way more easier compared if you didn't have those that pre-work done before. And I always say, like, everyone knows that if they want to lose fat and build muscle, they need to do three things: sleep right, eat right, and exercise right. And if you grab your phone, you're going to find a professional to help you out. So why is not everyone in their optimum fitness level? I was asking the same thing when I was managing the business incubator, where we actually had pretty good success rates, like 80% of people increasing revenue and at least 70%. But then my question was, what was wrong with the other ones? They didn't make it. They had a great idea. They were actually showing up. What was wrong with them? And then only when I found that is all this mindset piece that is missing when it comes down to entrepreneurship that gets people blocked. If you go and Google like entrepreneur, like images, you're gonna see people on their suits, like in New York, as you mentioned, in Silicon Valley. And that's not the truth of what really being an entrepreneur really means. And a lot of my work, especially with early stage entrepreneurs, is just break all those false belief systems and really start, helping them create their own definition of entrepreneurship and understand how they can play full out. And also associated with the concept of you need to quit your job to start your business. And that's not true, right? Especially if you're starting out, you do want to be accountable, and responsible with your time and your money. And like 99% of the times when you start a business, it doesn't need a full-time employee. Even if you
Yeah.
put all your hours, you still need to give the market some time to give you feedback so you get to interact and keep moving forward.
Yeah, I like what you just said. I think this is very spot on. It's very motivational. It's when we think what I hope we're going to see is really 9 billion people, 9 billion brains to generate one unique idea and market that within their niche. And hopefully we're going to see this in the next 50 or 100 years. And in the end, what happens is you do a succession of different projects or events. Alexander Bard would call them events. So it's the event is less than a company. So the company is, you have HR and you hire people and it's all this nonsense that nobody wants to do anymore. So an event is you create something that can be like an idea, it can be a product, it can be a website, it can be an app, whatever that is, and you get traction either. And generally it's some viral kind of growth, right? People for whatever reason love what you're doing. Now the hit rate is pretty low. You cannot assume just because you're smart and intelligent, you're going to have 100% hit rate. It's never going to happen, right?
No.
There's tons of other people going for the same market. But if everyone just does a succession of these events in his life, in her life, and what's so cool about this is it will be going viral if it makes sense, if it's productive, right? If it saves a problem that's real for very, very low cost. And we would have access to 9 billion super apps, right? That someone else wrote. That's kind of in my mind. Now, this won't be apps, right? There's can be AI, can be any kind of algorithm, can be any kind of backend software. But if you get to this level to never have to repeat the same thing and the same workflow that we do every day that we are all bored of, and now we have this problem in the US that many menial labor jobs, there's just no labor anymore, right? So this is very
Mm.
difficult. And I feel like, well, this is a good thing, right? I want people to get out of this and get into something creative. Obviously, we probably have to solve with automation, but we would all be so much better off because we all would make so much more money if we adopt this mindset. In my mind, obviously you gotta get some payoff. That's obviously the problem, right? So with all these, say you do 100 of these events in your life, right? So one a year, but if your payoff comes on average after 50, what do you do in the first 50 years? You're going to be really poor because you literally have no income. So, and I understand that you can keep your job, and that's great. I think this is great advice. You don't have to do this full time, but you have to come up with 100 unique ideas that could become a product. And I think this is what we should teach our children. And this is what the market is global immediately. So that's I think it's this wonderful incentive. You said that earlier. If you have enough bandwidth, you have the same market access in, I don't know, in Mombasa than anyone in Silicon Valley. There's literally no
Oh yeah.
difference. And that's such a great incentive. Like the millions of dollars are right in front of your keyboard, so to speak. Right? It's obviously there's more to it. It's not that easy. But that's the mindset that I would love that our children have and our young adults. And then I think they have this with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, but it's a mania, it's a bubble. But that's where they're all going to, because they say, well, why don't I buy some calls on Tesla? Because I just download Robinhood. It's
Yeah.
$500, and maybe it's going to make me $1 million. Maybe not, but that's okay.
100%. And I guess the main thing for me is as we're changing mindsets of individuals, is like one of the reasons why I'm so obsessed over power is that my understanding is that the world is not a better place yet because there's so many people struggling with their own relationship with power, right? So you have people in positions of power, but they're not in tune with their own power. So they're doing this horrible stuff trying to protect themselves and have a safe life, completely ruin over the life of countries and nations, sometimes even entire continents, because of that egoistic and fragile state they are right now, right? That's one thing. And the other thing that I always say to my entrepreneurs is that you need three pillars to build your legacy, whatever that means like for you, right? If you're talking about long term or generational wealth or just living a life you love, you need to focus on your income, in your impact, and in your integrity. Meaning that, and most people think that it's either one or the other, which is not, but you need to have your bills paid as a human being, your basic needs, and you have to have all the money that you need to build the life that you want to have. But the thing is, that money most probably gonna come if you are really in tune and connected with your impact you want to create in the world, right? As you're mentioning, how you want to change people's life, and it could be your local village, it could be your town, your city, your country, internationally now with the internet. But as long as you're connected with that impact and you start realizing that the more impact you do, this should really grant you more money so that you can extend your impact, your income, and your impact. And then you need to do those two things, remaining in integrity with yourself. And people think that integrity is just about, not doing the wrong thing, don't fall into corruption, don't cheat on a business alliance or something like that, which is true, but it goes beyond that. So to me, integrity speaks about you playing full out. You have this deep dream and this deep desire to impact people, start showing up accordingly. That's really being in integrity with yourself. It's, you are lacking, you are BS in your way, then stop doing that and start doing what it's right. Start playing full out and start really harnessing all the amazing stuff that is around you to help you grow and thrive.
Yeah, yeah, I think the three I's sound really interesting, wasn't it? Didn't we have the three P's in marketing? I always forget what that was. Product
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. The integrity is really for me something you're in it for the long term. Like, not the event that you produce might not be long term, but you want to do something that long term helps as many people as possible. And I do think, and you might correct me with this, I do feel it's good to think globally, like to think about global issues and solve them with something very local, like with a specific piece of the puzzle. There's an old saying, think global, think globally, and act locally.
Act local. Yeah.
Yeah, act local. I think it still applies, but it's obviously to produce something, and I think this is leads us to another phenomenon that we see, is that if you behave in that way, and I think we're all drawn to this way of leading our life. I think it's already happening for a couple of us, not for everyone, but for a lot of us. What happens is to identify something that where you think you do something better than anyone else on the planet, you have to
Hmm.
download a lot of knowledge, right? So you will spend a lot of time just in research, constant download of YouTube, whatever you research, just because you have to find that last little bit that you can add on GitHub, for instance, that last little line of code that makes everything so much better, and that you could potentially transform into an event. So what happens to is that you spend 18 hours a day in this virtual world, because otherwise you cannot identify these things. I feel they don't just come down to you while you're going through the garden. I mean, maybe it does, but you have to do the hard work before that.
Yeah, there are two things on what you said. So the first is, if there is one thing COVID taught us, is that we are more connected than we think we are. So again, if you are thinking about starting a business, or if you're already starting a business, literally there is no reason why you shouldn't aim for the whole world. Of course, there is all the steps you need to take to make it happen, but really the world is your playground. And I guess the second point on, people having their business and stuff, most people that I found, they struggle with this concept of having to commit with a business idea for the entire life. So, like, pretty much with the job thing, right? And I always say people, like, you are getting it all backwards. The number one thing you should have, like, crystal clarity around is your purpose. And I know it sounds like scary and daunting, your purpose, but if you're identifying your why, you realize that, okay, so in my case, my why, it's all about power and making sure that we remember our power, we step in on it, and we help others doing the same, right? Now, that's my why. But what I can do to really manifest that purpose, it could be a million different things. I could be doing what I'm doing, being, a power coach, but I could be a nurse in Mexico, making sure that people have the most healthy environment so that they recover and come back to their power. You know what I mean? I could have been selling street food in Bali, the food that is really real food and is healthy for you and give you the energy for you to show up in power. So your what can always be flexible, depending on where you are in your life and what you're really passionate about at the moment, but your why will remain the same. And then the how is that collaboration that you were mentioning, that interaction between other people, that downloads and all that stuff that allows you to really go into the steps you need to take to make your business successful. But it all starts by you accepting, embracing, and choosing that that's going to be your purpose, and you are committing to that. And the research bit is just incredible. The more you know, the more you'll be able to have information. I always think about the what as a collaboration between you and the universe, right? There is what you know and what the universe has to offer, and you find where those two overlap. That's usually what you should be doing right now.
Okay, it's getting pretty deep there. Okay.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, we already arrived at the universe. Hey, before that,
Uh-huh.
I want to talk about the universe, so that's good. One thing I keep pondering about. So this is my thesis, right? This is how I
Okay.
want these 9 billion brains to be interconnected in the hive brain, right?
Okay.
We're already on that quite a bit into this development. But what I'm seeing on the other side is, so for a long time, these things, it kind of works like acting, right? So you go to LA, you do crazy shit that you're really not proud of a couple of years later, but you just want to get in, right? You want to get in, you
Yeah.
get this role, and they say, no, you don't have a name, so we don't pay you anything. You're like, what do you mean? They said, yeah, you use it as a platform, and you're like, okay, whatever. But
Yeah.
you're gonna get some royalties, right? So if this show gets on syndicated TV, you might make, I don't know, $5,000 every month for the rest of your life. And it's a big if, right? If it's not a hit, then you won't get anything. But you can tell people, well, I played an important role.
Yeah.
And but this is how the world will look like, right? So there's a cash flow problem for my development. So we
Yeah.
can talk about UBI. A lot of people talk about this. And then the other problem that I see a little bit is, when we talk about an economy, it should be a resource allocation business, right? So money, productive capacity, labor. Think about Karl Marx a little bit. It is actually not run like Karl Marx realized
No.
in the end, and what came out of it, but what the early stage of Marx's analysis was, right? So how do we allocate this? And we do allocate it right now by price. So whoever pays me the most, this is what I'm going to do, right? But if I develop my own idea and I know I can only monetize it in the future, maybe 5 years, maybe 5 months, I don't know. How does this resource allocation feedback loop actually work, right? Because there's not someone I can go to and say, oh, how much do you pay me for that per hour or per month? You can't. Nobody can give you a price for this, right? So how do you balance this one where you say, well, we feel this is really good for the universe, for the human society, but we can't price it right now. An economist or other people can't price it because this has a lot of potential, but right now it has zero cash flow. So how do we price these opportunities, and how do we also, once we say, oh, we go give you UBI, how do we stabilize this? It could be a global UBI, right? How do we stabilize this, that people are actually doing what we want them to do and not just slacking, right? Or maybe slacking is good. That's another assumption.
So let's start with the whole, I have this crazy idea, but the world is not ready for it right now, or there is no pricing system about it right now. And I found, especially with African entrepreneurs, right? There is a lot of Bitcoin is actually the great example. It's a great example. So in many countries, Bitcoin is starting to get a more a legislation around it. And after Elon Musk announced that it will be accepting Bitcoin payments, and other companies are doing so, Bitcoin it became more of a mainstream type of thing. But for instance, in Mozambique, there is no financial law whatsoever around cryptocurrency in general. And I remember I was supporting an entrepreneur that he has a lot of experience with Bitcoin. He has a whole background in financing. So he's like the best person I knew that could help you make the crypto investments. And he was like, there is just no legislation, like at all. I don't even know how can I register my company to begin with to be legal and actually do be able, so that I can actually be able to have like bigger clients like other corporations and other organizations. And the exercise I did with him is like, okay, if we shift your what just a little bit, you're not necessarily a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency advisor right now. What can you do that still aligns with what you value, and that you can start monetizing right now? So we created this entire business model where he will help for courses basic around cryptocurrency. And actually he made contacts with some universities, so in their financial lecture they will have him come in and give a lecture around cryptocurrencies and the new financial system that's coming up. So if you're flexible again on your what, you can create pilots, prototypes that you can charge for, and charge actually decent money depending on what you're doing. They will allow you to not only just be able to pay your rent right now and pay your bills right now, but start building those foundations from when your big dream is possible for the world. Does it make sense? That first part.
Yes, I mean, some businesses definitely have. You can change the business model around, and you come up with a different revenue stream. I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
But what usually happens is you get sucked into these big platform economies, and I'm
Yeah.
always a little skeptical of the YouTube economy, the Instagram economy, whatever. Because yes, you build your personal brand, and that's great to an extent, right? But I
Yeah.
think it's a weird shortcut of this. This is what I have in mind. It's you're not honest with your audience when you're an influencer, because they never know if this is real, or you just do it for the money. So this is really weird. You destroy your brand once you go too far commercial. And the other problem is YouTube can always say, oh, you did something bad, and then you're gone, right? You're gone from Apple, you're gone from you're just gone. I mean, they can always switch you off. Now,
They cancel you. It's literally
yeah,
the
they
cancel
cancel
culture.
you. And they cancel people all the time, right? If they don't make money with them, they cancel them. And I mean, so what? They should be able to cancel them. But the platform economies, I think all the upside is with the platform.
Yeah.
The average upside for you can still work out beautifully. And these platforms have a place. But I feel for entrepreneurship, just becoming an Uber driver is not entrepreneurship. I mean, there is
No.
entrepreneurial qualities in it, right? But because Uber has so much more data than you can ever gather, even if you're the smartest driver in the whole network, there's light years ahead of you. So I want to move people a little bit out of these platforms and use them for what they're worth. But this is these platforms game people's minds, and that's the problem. And well, it's people's problem because they're not smart enough to realize this, right? And understandably, but you run with YouTube, you run against huge AIs, and you don't have a chance unless you have the right mindset.
Yeah, that's for sure. And for me, that sort of speaks more around mindset again, and specific around long-term mindset. Something that I found, especially with most African cultures, it's not something that is ingrained in our mindset. You know, like in Africa, children are usually seen as wealth, and it's like whatever you couldn't make it for yourself, your children will probably be able to, right? And it's like a long reason, or there's a long list of reasons why most Africans think like that, because it's like, you know, if I survived a colonialism, if myself I survived that all colonialism and stuff, then my kids don't need to survive that, right? But then they need to fight a civil war, and then they're gonna solve the civil war, but then my grandchildren get to actually live a proper life. You know what I mean? So there is all this concept that the next generation will continue. That's how Africans think long term. They don't usually think long term around my life being long term and all the stuff that I can do in long term. And with that, it comes that really quick win mindset. And honestly, I don't mind if you start driving Uber so that you can get to a point where you can do what you really love to do. Right. And that's the point that I believe you're trying to make. It's not, I mean, if you can use those platforms, is great. The problem starts when you allow those platforms to use you. So you become a slave to whatever they want to say. Right. I say a lot to entrepreneurs like, you don't work for Instagram. It's okay for you to take a day off. You know, it's okay to not be the algorithm every day. You don't work for Instagram, you work for yourself. And the way that I at least protected myself against being or feeling trapped with all those platforms in making sure that I have different streams of income that I know that if I don't show up on Instagram, it's not a big deal. I can still live with that. So that's one. And two, it's I'm really clear around my purpose. So and even like when I get like overwhelmed of opportunities, it's very easy for me to say no to what doesn't really is aligned and to say yes to what really is aligned, even though it can be quite inconvenient. So if you start living from your purpose, again, going back to that bigger conversation, a lot of those, all of that noise, you are able to distinguish it and see what really fits for you or not. How
Yeah.
does that answer your question, Thorsten?
Yes, it does, but it's difficult, and I think
It
what
is.
we're talking about is this learning curve, and I know it goes back to this. You become a slave to the machine. That's the risk
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking about, right? So people think their phones and their iPads, they do things for them, and they control them, but no, they control us. And you see this now, 10 years, 15 years in, they totally control us, because in the end, it's someone else on the other side of that app, right, that controls you. It's a
Yeah.
psychologist often. So it's not really fair, these things, because there's massive amount of knowledge that works against you. But the only chance, and that's obviously the problem, the only chance to succeed in my model that I want is to be the person who knows the most about that specific problem. But that means you have to download so much knowledge that you spend 20 years just downloading 30 years of downloading knowledge, and then you generate one little line that makes the world a better place. I guess that's the only way to do it. But the risk is that you're continuously being made addicted to these platforms is pretty high. And I think
Mm.
we are still on that transformational phase where people are not really aware of what's going on with these platforms. It has changed a lot the last 2 years. I think we're in a different ball game now. The mind is easily adaptable to this. But that is obviously the risk that I feel. But the huge payoff is obviously that you can come out of a country, a region, a place where you don't have much in common with the people around you besides a social atmosphere. But you have this global this global opportunity just waiting for you. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? How do we get people to see this for what it is,
Yeah.
and not, when I go back to my hometown, nobody sees the internet. They all just see the two Facebook pages, right? And they
Yeah.
read, and they don't care about the internet. I'm like, why on earth are you not seeing the opportunity? They're like, what do you mean? The internet is just for watching Netflix. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But this is how people think, because their mind is not open, and I can't open it, right?
Yeah.
But maybe I can help open it a little bit over time, or maybe I can identify a trend that opens people. I think this is the problem in Africa. It's a very local tribal culture, and the global opportunity is there, but it's not really evaluated properly.
You spoke so much wisdom in that piece, man. So one hand is this notion that entrepreneurs need to be good enough to be able to do something, right? Like I need to accumulate all the knowledge I can to be good enough to do it. And honestly, I'm gonna call that BS. A lot of it, we say that it's because we don't want to offer a service that's less than what someone deserves, but actually the main reason why we do that is because we don't feel confident enough over the knowledge that we have, and we don't see that as valuable as it is for other people. And we have the crazy stories. I mean, my story was around my accent, and for the longest of time I was like, people are gonna hate my accent. I'm gonna speak with those American folks. You're gonna be like, you sound weird, we don't want to work with you. But what I found is actually people, especially from North America and Europe in general, they actually love my accent. And I was like, how? Right? Like, because for me, there was such a barrier that people wouldn't be able to understand me and stuff, but that wasn't true at all. So a lot of the times we think that we need to get the next course and the next training for us to start doing something. And again, that's not true. If you can start, and I guess it also aligned with lot of entrepreneurs, they wanted to start big. They want to start with the office. They want to start, being on social media and television and all that stuff. But if you're willing to start small and I'm just starting out my business, I'm figuring this out as I go, you start realizing that people are way more willing to support you and give you feedback and an input for you to, grow and develop as an entrepreneur. So that's one of the pieces that I feel. You don't need to
By the way,
download 8 hours.
yeah. By
Uh-huh.
the way, I fully agree with you. This is more motivational part.
Yeah.
Yes, you need to get out with what you have and not wait to make it perfect. I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Um, but in order to survive the economics in that marketplace that I have in mind,
Yeah.
there's no room for two people who are doing the same thing. There's one person that's being chosen, and this is the person that does it for the least amount of money and the most elegant way. It might be the user interface. Like Airbnb, a lot of people say, well, we had VRBO 20 years earlier. What's special about Airbnb? Well, it's the user interface and the marketing, right? And now it's also obviously the
Yeah.
network effects because you have the most properties.
Can I challenge you that a lot of it comes from it really is a scarcity mindset when we think that opportunities are limited, and if I take a place, this is someone needs to lose that place for me to take it, which it is true in some certain, into a certain degree. If I have $20, I can either pay you or the other guy for the same product that costs $20, which in part is true. But to me, the real issue here, the real problem is when we think that I cannot even start because I'm not good enough. I'm saying that you can start with what you have, and you should have a development plan for yourself. The way you allow you to keep learning and keep growing. And I know it can be quite crazy, but you want to survive in business, and I guess that's your point. You want to survive in business forever if you're only focused on doing business as usual. You need to cater for business of tomorrow, and doing those downloads and opening up for new experiences how you get it. But two is, if you acknowledge what makes you unique as an entrepreneur and you bring that to your business, you realize that there will people they will buy from you because it's you. And that's why you see like a lot of talk on social media around focus on your niche, focus on your niche, focus on your niche. Because if you have a clear niche, a niche is not just your customer segment, is your customer segment plus your offer plus what you do for them for your customer segment. You realize that, well, I can help entrepreneurs that are starting out. When they reach their 5 million mark, I'm not the guy to help them out. Then I need to send them to someone else. You know what I mean? So there is opportunity for almost everyone, really. It's a matter of you understanding where do you fit in, and that personal development and business development and growth really matters. But don't allow that to stop you from starting. Start and then learn what you need to learn on, because it's also a huge mistake that people make. When you're starting out, you assume you might need all those different skills. That when you are doing your business, you realize that people are not valuing all those stuff that you thought they will value.
Yeah.
So there is that balance, that dance that I believe we should master as entrepreneurs.
I agree. Obviously, you got to find a jumping off point, and then you go to where you become that one singular solution. But what I think is important is all these things are not a zero sum game, right? So every
Yeah.
single solution that helps us think about Google, how much more productive we are, and we can do things we could never dream of without the original Google search engine. So every single one of this innovation doesn't have to be a technical innovation necessarily. It can be any kind of innovation. Those
Yeah.
are adding to the game, and that's how this. It's a completely non-zero sum game. What that means, it's everyone who participates helps everyone make more money. That's the funny part of this economy, and so as more people do this dance, as more people have a chance to make more money with what they are already doing right now. But I mean, one day it will become outdated, and then they have to jump to the next model, right? So I think
And
we're
let me just add there,
yeah,
Thorsten. uh, I think as an entrepreneur, you should also ditch the belief that you have to do everything by yourself. And I believe you are really bringing that point that be open to collaborate with other people. You know,
yeah,
like I have programs that sell for $10,000, and I don't do 100% of the work. I work with other people that can add value way better than I can. And that specific unique combination that I have with them, it's so unique, as you're mentioning, that makes people to buy it. So you don't feel like you have to be the only one coming in with the innovation and with solutions. You can always find great partners.
yeah, absolutely. Um, when we take this a little further, so let's assume I work with an incubator, you work with Idea Lab, I work with an
Yeah.
incubator here in the US, but it doesn't really matter. Can be location independent. How would you go about knowing what you know in a particular case in Africa in Mozambique? But how would you go about say what we just talked about? How do we bring this into a reality? Obviously, in a very very small portion, but how do we create that mindset fostering kind of set of incentives, right? How do we go about well, we describe something that happens with or without us. Like
Yeah.
we are not needed. We are just seeing it happening, right? We're just spectators for this digital revolution. But if we want to make money from this conviction, how would you
Uh-huh.
go about it? Maybe that's part of what Idea Lab already does.
Yeah, it is part of what Idea Lab does. It's part of Orange Corners, the incubator I manage does, and it's part of what my business does right now. So the first thing I say is it actually step zero will be get clarity around the stakeholders involved. You know, especially if you're talking about the entrepreneurship ecosystem, you have from academia, research institutions, the government, entrepreneurs, banks, financial institutions, all those folks. You need to understand who they are first in the ecosystem you're trying to operate. Step number two is to identify the gaps within the ecosystem. And just to give you a context, the incubator we launched in Mozambique, Orange Corners, it already happened in South Africa. They had three business centers here. And part of my work was to get the experience they had, tailor it to the Mozambican market, and create something that the Mozambican market was needing. But we did it in a way that was so beautiful, I guess, that they invited us to train program managers from Angola, Sudan, to replicate that Orange Corners concept within their countries. And the way we did it wasn't by just showing them what we've done, but it's by giving them the framework that I'm giving you partially right now. So get clarity around the stakeholders, then the gap within the ecosystem, and then you have to decide what is going to be your role. And that's key, like your unique selling point. What can you bring to the table in that ecosystem that no one else can? Because you can identify 3 to 4 gaps and realize that you're actually only good at fixing half of one gap. So focus on that. And the
Yeah.
third point, it will be get a local partner. I mean, I never heard of a program that was successful in a foreign country that was implemented by foreigners without having local people. Without having local people, they can even understand the context and can bring that level of empathy that only a local person means. And when I say local, it's not just Julio from Mozambique. It's like if you're doing something with women, I'm not gonna be your guy 100% because I'm a guy. There is a level that they will never fully empathize with me.
50% only. Oh
At least,
yeah.
like, and
Yes.
I can even
We
push it
all
to
50%.
70. Yeah,
We
I can put
understand,
like to
right?
70% to say, like, you know what, I'm a guy, so I can be your father, I can be your brother, I can be your son, so I can give you three perspectives, so
Yeah.
70%. But there is a point I won't make it, so have the local point
Yeah.
in touch.
Well, I'm asking also specifically, we have this huge bubble in early stage investing in many parts
Uh-huh.
of the world, especially in the US. And you have tons of incubators, seed funds, and they grill you all day about what is your USP, what are you why should we invest in you? And that's all good, right? They should do that. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then you turn around the question and say, why would I want you guys to invest in my business? And they say, yeah, it's about the network effect. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Make it more concrete for me, right? And they say, yeah, well, we've been doing this for 10 years. I'm like, that's nice, right? But I've been doing this for 20 years. Well, whatever the story is, right? So this makes no
Yeah.
difference. Maybe that's even a bad thing. Track record is not, as we say, the past results don't predict the future results. What I'm trying to say is the investor USP, and in the end, it's the valuation to me, right? So you pay me the highest price, so you're my guy. If you know how to sell a company to Sequoia, that's even better. Or a lot of your companies go IPO, that's also a selling point. But in the end, the price is very, very few points where an incubator or a seed fund or any VC fund really has much of a USP to deliver beyond the valuation. Like they want to make it sound differently, and we had Benjamin here on the podcast, and he was very, very, very outspoken about this. But if I keep thinking about this, in the end, valuation is really the most important part. You give me more money for my future project, that's great.
Yeah.
And you're my guy, otherwise, probably not. But that's weird, right? Because if you do this with startups, it's the opposite. It's strange. But
It
it's probably
is.
good that way.
I mean, I have a confession. I ran the incubator for 2 years, and now another colleague is running it because I'm running my business. And for the 2 years, we didn't offer any entrepreneurs sort of cash or funding or cash flow or overdraft or anything like that. So I think a huge change of mindset is happening even within the US, is realizing that sometimes too much money can actually cripple the business
Oh,
because
yeah.
people just spend on stuff that doesn't really matter and they don't really understand the concept. And what's worse is that takes the chance of the entrepreneur to win the right to be in the market. And for me, that's when you reach a point where you are way past break even as an entrepreneur, and you understand that as is, you can actually survive off of that business. And you only need funding to accelerate your growth over something that has been already been validated, tested, and improved. I mean, that's the key for me when finance come through. But then investment in cash, it's not the only type of investment entrepreneurs need. Speaking from experience, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in Africa, they don't have support from their families to thrill the entrepreneurial journey. Being an entrepreneur is not something as desirable as it is in the US, as it is in Mozambique or in other African countries, especially for the older generations. So just having, some sort of certification or accreditation or just association. I remember when I won that award that you mentioned, I had entrepreneurs coming with their families and be like, I told you, I know one of the 100 most influential young Africans. I'm doing something right. And just that changed their entire life, family life situation, because now their parents are actually supporting them as entrepreneurs. So there is a lot of psychological support entrepreneurs need, that validation and reassuring that they're doing the right thing, but trying to change the world. That's one of them. There is a lot of things around access to markets, and I fight every day around, the main issue in Africa is just access to markets, not even funding to begin with, but it's just really presenting an entrepreneur with a client that they can get a chance to try their products, experiment, improve on them, so when they get to the next client, they won't be making the same mistake they were doing beforehand. And if you think about holistically about supporting entrepreneurs, you realize that funding comes in a very specific moment to just break a cycle the entrepreneur is at, but never as an initiator of movement, is an accelerator of breakthrough, if that makes sense. It's like
Yeah,
technology,
it makes, well, yes, I fully understand where you're coming from, but the reality is a little bit, think about
different. Yeah.
I have my children go to a very good school here in Silicon Valley, and it's there's so much money spent on these kids. I mean, on average, for instance, New York State spends $30,000 a year on every student. That includes primary education.
Whoa.
$30,000 per student. It's a massive amount of money that mostly goes into administration. Whatever it actually goes to, nobody really knows. So it's
Nobody really knows.
absolutely not needed. I mean, even 3,000 is actually pretty high nowadays. Building costs, and I mean, there's a certain, you have to have competitive salaries. I understand there is a certain limit to this. But what I'm trying to say is, if you grow up in that environment where everything is already cared for, you don't strive, you don't improve, you don't find that edge that's necessary to an extent to come up with the best solution on the planet, right? We go back to this unique angle. And there is a space, there's enough space for 9 billion to come up with something that's unique and the
Yeah.
best on the planet. So, or 100 billion, it doesn't matter how many billions people and AIs people have for this. But if you come go to an elementary school in Ethiopia, right? You go in a little
Hmm.
village in Ethiopia or in Mozambique, you basically all you have is your phone. But and you have desperate conditions. But sometimes I feel maybe that's better because you get this desperation, you get this hunger, literally often, unfortunately, but also this
Yeah.
intellectual hunger. But you have the same access, you have the same mobile phone, the same YouTube videos, you can watch the same MIT courses. Maybe that's actually better. That's what's going on in my mind now. Maybe I'm crazy, it's maybe just me. But sometimes I feel maybe this should be better because in my own experience, and that's my own experience growing up in communist Eastern Germany, kind of like
Yeah.
ex-communist Mozambique,
Yeah.
that definitely helped me. I feel it helped me, this experience, and I didn't have to go for 40 years. That would be a different story. But for 5 years of that experience, or a
Hmm.
little bit of consciousness, I mean, I was a kid, obviously, but still, it helped me a little bit to see, okay, this is an alternative reality, and that could be really shitty. So you better get your stuff together. And I don't know, maybe that's better than being, okay, I'm already so rich and so great, but I haven't done anything for it, right? But as a kid, you don't do
Uh-huh.
that. You think everything you do is because of you, because you're so great.
Yeah. So can I challenge that?
Yeah, of
And
course,
this was
please.
my personal belief for many years that entrepreneurs needed, actually, I believe that successful people needed struggle to thrive. And while in part you do need to go through a moment where you need to redefine who you are and how you want to show up, that doesn't necessarily need to be what other people will consider struggle, right? Remember, everyone struggles with a different thing in a certain point of their life, regardless if it is financial struggle, mental struggle, emotional struggle, whatever the struggle it is. So that's the first point. And I found, and this actually psychologists research around it, people show up today not based on their past experience, but based on what they believe is possible around the future. And the example they give is like, when a woman was going to a date, men too, they can shave, but they only shave because they're going to the date tomorrow, not because they had a date before. You know what I mean? So human beings, they're way more wired to show up today as they believe the future will be.
Oh, yeah,
So if
absolutely.
you right,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
if you have an entrepreneur that is struggling in Mozambique or wherever in Southeast Asia or wherever in the world, if they don't have a belief that the future can be better, and if they can actually contribute or participate in the happening of their future, they're not going to change. And the same thing happens with people who are coming from more wealthy backgrounds. If their belief is that they're going to be always wealthy and they don't need to do anything about it, they won't change, and it's actually,
Yeah.
it's more easily they will go to bankruptcy than they're going to keep the money in the family. And the whole study around generational wealth and stuff. But my point is, it's not about the past, it's about what you believe is possible in the future and your role in it. That's what really determines how we show up today.
I think I would say both things are very important, but
Yeah.
I mean, I fully agree with that point that your today's action are really determined by your prediction for the near term future. A lot of people say this is the next 2 years. Differs for most people, but this is something
Yeah.
that people feel like they have
Difference.
a handle on, right? And the next 20 years, people are like, oh, there's too much going, too many variables outside of my control. You never know what happens. There's COVID. Nobody really knows
That's
what
true.
it could have had a great
That's true.
impact or no impact, and it had, I'd say, medium impact. But depending on what business you run, might have a devastating impact or really positive
That's true.
impact for you, right? It just changed things around.
Yeah.
Um, when you well, let's zoom out a little bit and go a little bit to the macro perspective. When you see
Okay.
countries that are being traded as great places for innovations to come out of, it's in Africa, we usually see immediately South Africa, Nigeria,
Uh-huh.
Kenya,
Yeah.
and then the list gets a little thinner. People are like, Tanzania was great, and there's a lot of stuff that probably more infrastructure investments that didn't go the way everyone
Yeah.
was hoping. But then the list gets really thin. There isn't on everyone's mind. There's Ghana, which is certainly still on the list, and there's Mozambique. But there's about 50 countries in Africa. Why is the list so thin? Why do you think is
Yeah.
that still the case? And do you think it will? What ranking will we see, and what impact will we see over the next
Yeah.
10 years, maybe?
I mean, the first thing I would really like people to get it is that there is a lot of political interest when UN builds those ranking, because usually it's the entrepreneurship index, or quality of life and stuff like that. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, of political interest, and I can give you even a Mozambican example. So 2019, actually 18 to 19, Mozambique went low in every index you can find around investment and entrepreneurship in business. Once they realized how much money they were losing over the investment they were having in the north of my country, like from really, like from one day to the other, Mozambique went up on the ranks, but nothing changed. I promise you, nothing changed. So that's one thing you should be aware of.
Everyone's gaming the statistics.
Everyone's gaming the statistics to play to their interests, right? Again, it's
Sure.
that conversation around people in position of power. They are not feeling powerful, and thus creating all those cascading effects in other people's life. That's one. And two is, even if you just talk with your business friends or just friends in general, people will always give you a perspective on what they feel it's good or bad for you, right? So in my example, the first time I heard about Dubai, it was one of my friends who told me, like, you should never go to Dubai. It's like all plastic, all those buildings, like they're empty, half of them. There's nothing for you there. So I went to Bahrain. I told you the story at first. It's in the Middle East, and then I went to Dubai. I made so much amazing connections, so many amazing connections, and actually struck some good deals. And I actually found out there is a whole side of the Middle East that people don't show up in terms of research, as you mentioned, from Israel and stuff, from environment and all the things that's not being communicated. So there is always this sort of like personal filter that people puts on when they give you recommendation about a place, or if you should go or not go to a place. And I always say, if you can see by yourself, that's good. If you can't, you can Google on YouTube. You can see videos, on how Mozambique looks like, how Tanzania looks like. And if you could make a connection with someone in that country and ask the person their perspective on it, at least you have more options to build your own opinion around a place. And it really doesn't matter if it is, just a town next to yours or whatever, but just understand that, and understand that everyone will give you feedback from when they're coming from and what is in their best interest. And if you're willing to challenge that, I mean, there are amazing opportunities waiting for you. Like 100%. You might need some work, and I especially think with the case in Africa is that mainly the main language in the UN is English, so they always write English-speaking countries first, and then French, and then Portuguese ones. So there is already that filter. But I mean, if you are in America or whatever, and you're willing to learn Portuguese or French, what's stopping you?
Yeah, there's
Does that
something
answer
about the
your question?
languages. Yeah, there's something.
Yeah.
I think there's a little more to this. I fully agree with you. There's certainly the view on the ground often differs, and this is just statistics. I'm with you, but I think there is, once we if we force ourselves to take a macro view, there is something to that. How maybe it's certainly not always justified, but as the likeliness, for instance, how to move money in and out in South Africa is extremely easy, right? You won't have
Yeah.
any trouble. The currency exchange rate might change a little bit. That's obviously a risk you're
Every
taking.
day.
But then you go, I don't know, Malawi, and it gets
Yeah.
way more tricky to move certain amounts of money in and out. It's possible, certainly, but you've got to talk to some government officials to get big money in and out, and they will want their cut. Is it 1%? Is it 10%? You will find out, right? And
Yeah.
so it's just getting harder. It adds additional layers of bureaucracy to it. Now you can choose a business where you don't have that problem, right? So there's just digital businesses. You don't have to move a ton of money around, and you can have your credit card processing done in Hong Kong or wherever, right, or Singapore. So you don't have that problem. But and there's also the same amount of infrastructure is often a big deal. Can you rely? It's basically
Yeah.
a cheap resource you're using. We're thinking of infrastructure as one like God-given thing. No, it's a cheap resource that someone else built, and you can just use it for free, right? That's what roads
Yeah.
basically are. And if they don't exist, then well, then you have to change your business model or build your own infrastructure. You notice with mining,
Yeah.
corporations usually have, and they're used to building their own infrastructure. So they put in a train or they put in a road because otherwise they can't get it out, and that's
Yeah.
already baked into the cake. So this talk about infrastructure, I think, is a little self-serving sometimes because a taxpayer paid for it, and why they did it, that's often not so clear, right? Because the government decided it's a good idea. Generally, it is, but it's not always a good idea to build huge infrastructure projects, right?
Yeah, not at all. We call them white elephants in Mozambique.
Yes, there's a big gulf between what's needed and what's being built, and that's ridiculous. There's this airport in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you've seen this. They built a second airport, and
Uh-huh.
but nobody wants to fly there because literally there's no people around and there's no roads leading there. So they have elephants from the jungle going on the runway. So it's literally a white elephant project, right?
Yeah, and we have so many stories like that in Mozambique.
Yeah,
Like full-fledged, less top of the line buildings that's like in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, yeah. That's obviously you're interesting. That's government bureaucracy. So, but well, kind of the last thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe you're very bullish about this, is crowdfunding, right? So
Hmm.
crowdfunding kind of gives us this idea that we and I had Darren Marble on, and we talked about basically it you're obviously blind to what's going on, and I think Pioneer works a little bit like this too. Do it's not directly crowdfunded; it's a big pool of money that goes into it. So you only focus, and that used to be the idea, right? So when we talk about the stereotypes and discounts, and people say when you say, well, we want to, your money goes to Nigeria, you say, well, is it a donation? I say, no, 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 it's a profit making money, and you're like, oh, how do I ever get that money out, right? So assume I make a ton of money. So there's immediate hesitation for good reason, I feel, right? Some of this
Yeah.
is stereotyping, but some of this is real. I mean, it's tricky. So what crowdfunding offers is basically it gives you this bias-free filter. You see the investment opportunity, you either say thumbs up or down, and you put a little bit of money to it because you like it emotionally or because you think this is trending. Well, whatever
Yeah.
reason you have to put $100 into this business, it could be a boon. But when I see crowdfunding that raise noticeable amounts of money, we're back to mostly U.S. businesses, right? Because again,
Hmm.
there's certain early adopter advantages that are very tricky to replicate in other locations. But do you think crowdfunding is kind of a bit of the solution to the problem, especially for Mozambique?
Even to my own surprise, the answer is yes. So I actually have an example. So last week I was speaking with another comedian. So I was the reason why I'm bringing all those comedian examples is that I've been working with them for the last few weeks, so I have them fresh in mind.
Okay.
But there is this comedian in Mozambique that started to make so the news in Mozambique can be quite comic, right? Really like quite comic because you have different of accents and people say stuff that really doesn't make sense. So he like basically he impersonates them on funny videos on YouTube and social media. And then one time I think I don't know what happened, but he said like, stop just liking my videos, ask me for my M-Pesa number so that you can send me money about it. And he started crowdfunding like that, and people really pay every time he posts something, people pay. And if you stop to think about it, business models that operates with OnlyFans, for instance, it's pretty much the same concept, but people pay you so that you show up something, right? It could be you making a fun video or something else. But I'm seeing more, especially with Africa, when it's easy to grow with economies of scale, especially if you go with digital content that, you just produce it one and just share it. It's quite an interesting funding opportunity. I'll say that the other side of the coin is that there is no real legislation for registered businesses to receive sponsorship with those specific words. So you can change it as really payment for views. If you change that, you can receive that money legally. Again, there are a few,
Yeah.
and I
But you
guess
don't
it's
get
also
any
one of
stock. Are you getting any stock or like shares?
no, no, no.
No.
You don't get any stock. It's pretty much like crowdfunding. You just give the money for
But you
because
could
you like it.
buy, say, a Nigerian startup that issues shares. That wouldn't be a
Hmm.
problem, right? It's not something you're prohibited from as a consumer. Because
No, no, no. That's
crowdfunding
not.
was
Yeah,
illegal in the US for the longest time. Now it's
yeah. No,
changed.
that's not a problem. You can list your company in the we'll call it the value exchange market. You can list your company. People can buy shares. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. I guess the main problem with early investment, it's not tailored to startups, and I think that's sort of everywhere. You know,
Yeah,
the deadlines are not real. Startups usually like the support and access to market, so they can pay back the money and stuff like that.
yeah. Well, yeah. The question is, with crowdfunding, it's kind of in between. I make a donation, Kiva, and
Yeah.
on the other hand, it's I put my money in a retirement fund that maybe also allocates a little bit to venture capital. There's always like a
Mm,
mixed allocation. Well, with crowdfunding, you're somewhere in between. You're like, I just I know I will lose this money, but maybe I make a lot of money back, and but then you want like a legal system that at least a little bit enforces it. In the end, there's no full enforcement. Everybody knows that. So if the company
Yeah.
doesn't make it, or if it gets drawn out in legal battles, then there's no profits to be harvested. That's just the way it is. But you kind of want that idea that you bought 0.11% of that company, so you get 0.11% when it goes IPO, for instance. Well, there's dilution, there's more to it, but I think that's what people want, and it's more cultural thing, right? Than a legal. You can legally enforce it, but obviously this is a little shaky. You want the culture to support this, and you want the trust of a marketplace or an institution.
Yeah, and my experience is that different African countries, they're sort of keeping up with all the financial changes differently. So again, in Mozambique, there's no legislation around crowdfunding, even around social businesses. So we still get taxed as a regular business will do. So there are those things, and my understanding is that the government is sort of starting to listen to the startups and entrepreneurs. They're even making some tests, like small ones. But if I have to like bet, it's a it's a long term shot. It's a long range shot
Yeah.
with that. But there are ways that you can navigate to those maps, but you need to probably have the local expertise to help you out in any African country, really. The same thing to Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Nigerian, even in Tunisia, even though it's white Africa, right? But it's still in there. You have those challenges.
Yeah, Tunisia is very special. I actually like Tunisia a lot. As a traveler, it's a great place. It's a great value. I think they have the cheapest airport taxis I've ever seen. It's like $2, and they get you anywhere in the, I don't know, 60 miles radius. It's amazing.
Tunisia is really amazing. And it's even like when we speak about Africa, it's so interesting how Southern Africa is different from Eastern Africa, and it's different from Western Africa, and it's different from Northern Africa.
Yeah,
And it's still the same continent.
it needs more exposure. It needs more exposure on all levels, I feel.
But
Hopefully,
that's something that I
yeah,
guess it's not just Africa, right? It feels like the United States sort of rules communication in the planet and exposure in the planet. But again, there's a lot. I mean, you travel a lot, you know this, but there's a lot of beautiful and amazing stuff happening in Africa that you have no idea. Now, like local people with almost nothing doing so much for their community, that you just be like, how can the world not know about this?
yeah. Well, in the end, it's the attention economy. Obviously, we have the same problem we talked about earlier. You have to find this unique niche, and then you have to keep scaling it. And yes, it's a question of money, and there's a part of capitalist power structure involved. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
But it's really, when we talk about the informationalism, to use that term that Alexander coined, it's really you. If you have, sooner or later, and I think this is definitely true, sooner or later, if you have something interesting enough, then it will get global scale. And it doesn't really matter where you start from. Yes, is it easy in English? Yes, it is easier in the US. But think about Gangnam Style is an exception. But just think about it. The most watched video of all times, right, comes in a
That's
language
true.
that nobody speaks. It's funny, but it looks like any other video out there. It's an earworm, yes, but there's so many, and it just makes it, right? So long term, I guess, this core innovation, whatever that innovation is, will win. And it's I think it's a core power law of informationalism, that this holds true. Now, obviously, cancel culture is a problem, but you can always go to another platform, right? And then you might get canceled again, but you can build your own platform. Think about the Twitter-like platforms that we have here.
Yeah, but it also speaks about you using more decentralized platforms, like Telegram, WhatsApp. If you use WeChat from China as well, decentralized to an extent to a certain government, I guess it's the
Yeah,
best way to put it. But there's also something around you as an entrepreneur being comfortable in showing up for all that visibility that you want. And like 50, no, 60% of the clients I work with, specifically on their exposure component, the main drawback for they don't having the exposure is that they're not comfortable with what they might entice. There is a huge fear of success and fear of failure. You know, like I do put all this work and doesn't work out, or what if this actually works out? Then my life changes forever. So usually entrepreneurs, they fail to take action because of all that fear of success and failure.
yeah. Well, I feel all the games we play with each other, these social games, they're rigged, right? They're all rigged in someone's favor. You just need to find out, are they rigged in your favor potentially, or in someone else's favor, and then That's it. But that's true for anything we do in life. Right? If you think of life as a real world simulation, and everyone plays these roles that you don't even know why they
Yeah.
play it, you could just snap out of the role, but then people look at you crazy and say, no, I can't do it. They obviously know it's a role, but they don't want to get out of it. They are rigged in their favor. Like, think about an airport gate agent, right? They have all the power to let you on this flight or not, and they really use that power. They make sure that they're
Yeah.
the boss, and that's why they show up at work. They don't show up because they get paid whatever, $5 an hour, $15 an hour. They want to exercise that power and get off on it, which is great, right? But you have to find in life this place for an airport agent. It's their way of finding a game that's rigged in their favor, at least emotionally, and you just have to find one that's rigged in your favor. It takes a while, and it's online the same
You know,
problem as offline.
it is. And if I can make a recommendation, a book that actually two books that really changed my perspective on systems. So the first one is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
I believe it's his name.
Yeah.
And what really struck me is that he really said what you're saying. Like, there is always a system. You need to figure it out how the system works, and then you get to choose, like, are you going to play with the system? Are you going to play the system, or are you going to destroy the system completely? So that's super key. And the second book is The Good to Great from Jim Collins, and literally speaks about you having that unique selling point, that unique value proposition. But it's not just what you are good at, it's also what the world needs and what you can be the best at doing, as you're mentioning, and doing that in a way that feels good for you and your team as you're growing your company. And like, there's tons of research around it, so I highly recommend you checking out those books if you haven't already.
Yeah, read Outlier. I haven't read Jim Collins, right? That was the second book
Yeah.
you mentioned. I'm
Yeah.
gonna look that up. That sounds interesting.
It's
Julio,
super cool.
I'm running out of time. Thanks for coming on there. that was awesome. That was a great chat. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for taking the time.
I love it. I love it. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to next time.
Sure.
Julio, take it easy. Talk soon.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.